Do I believe in everything the party platform has? No. And I said so while I was in the legislature.
Jeff, thank you for coming. I appreciate you.
Thank you for having me.
So you're running against Brian Lenney in District 13.
District 13 Senate seat. That's the east side of Nampa.
Okay. Talk me through this. The area is so diverse in different viewpoints, different issues. I mean, we obviously have a broad mix of agriculture and then really urban, and it's such a wide swath. So what's going on in District 13 that's driving you to actually want to engage in the state level?
Couple of things. So I'm not a politician by nature. Senate, I won the state Senate seat for District 13 back in 2016. And that was after about 5 years of arm twistings by my friends, my foes, and other people that thought I should be in politics. I'm a banker and a businessman by profession, but I'm a guy that feels like that he should give back to his community as much or more than it's ever given to him. And Nampa's been very good to me over the years and my family for multiple generations before that. So I've always been involved in Nampa. I've sat on the hospital board. I've sat on probably nearly every civic club's board, sit on the Snake River Stampede Rodeo board. So really involved in attempting to make Nampa a better place, or doing my part. It's not an attempt because I think we actually accomplish the goals most of the time. So people were after me to run for an office, and I said, I'm not a politician. That's just something beyond what I wanted. The senator in my district, in District 13 at the time, and still District 13, chose to run for the Supreme Court justice and pulled his name out of the hat at the last minute. So I get a panic phone call. Jeff, we need to put somebody in there because he's pulling, tomorrow's the end of the filing date. We need a name in there. And I said, absolutely, we'll throw my name in, but I'm going on vacation. I'll need to vet this with friends and family and my employer when I get back from vacation. And there's 50% likelihood that I will probably pull my name. So if you can deal with that, then so can I.
Yeah, right.
There we went, and long story short, after vetting with my employer, I thought that was going to be the first no, and little did I know that they really supported that, which was kind of strange, in my opinion, for a bank in particular. But they really do, Zions Bank really does support the legislative process. In fact, they have 7 employees, or at that time had 7 employees in the legislature in Utah. Had not done it in Idaho, so I was the guinea pig. And again, they were very supportive, which was my surprise to me. Threw my name in the hat, was elected, served initially on JFAC, Commerce, Health and Welfare, and Judiciary and Rules. So had a full plate. As the years went by, I scaled that down to just JFAC and Commerce, two areas that, as a banker and a business guy, that's probably where my expertise lied. I finished my career a little earlier than I expected. I was primaried out in 2022. There was a couple of special interest groups that did not like the fact that they couldn't control my vote, I guess is maybe the way that they would put it. We had some conversations before that. They asked why I wasn't voting for their stuff, and I said, my constituents come first, and I will vote for all good bills that impact my constituents in a positive way, and I'll vote against those that don't, and that isn't going to change. Well, they changed it in a different manner.
This podcast is brought to you by MTU Studios. If you're looking to start a podcast or need content for your business or personal use, content of any type, please reach out to MTU Studios. MTUstudios.com. We'd love to help. Yeah, there's a real interesting dynamic developing, or at least emerging, really becoming visible, that it appears that there are some politicians throughout the state that are really interested in voting a very specific party line way. And it's curious to, and again, they may be representative of their constituents, but it appears that some of them are really, really intense about, okay, this is what kind of the party wants, and that's what I'm going to do. And again, that might be representative of all their constituents. But I find the people in this area, specifically the Treasure Valley, to be so diverse. It's very hard for me to imagine that all of the constituents, for instance, within District 13, all want this one thing, right? Or there's at least, all right, I'm voting this way, but like I understand there are some drawbacks here, things like that. It's just kind of like full bore, I'm going for the party instead of I'm going for the constituents.
Yeah, and I think that's it's interesting. I'm reading Arnold Schwarzenegger's book now, Be Useful, and he talks a little bit about this from the time that he came to America, his various ventures, including his political venture, and he talks about the changing in the parties. And I think the words that he used, I probably won't get it exactly right, but I think the words he used, are you a servant to the party or a servant to the people? Or servant to the public. And I've always viewed myself as a servant to the public. Certainly, I'm a lifelong Republican. Republican Party espouses the values that I was brought up with, that I believe in. Do I believe in everything the party platform has? No. And I said so while I was in the legislature. The Idaho Party, gives you an opportunity to accept the pledge of the platform as it stands, make any exceptions to it, or not accept the pledge. And I always took that very seriously and read through the platform in detail, and typically accepted out a piece or two with an explanation as to why. I'm probably a little more nuanced guy, and that might come from my financial education and background, that I look at the details. You know, every comma, every period, every word makes a difference. And so when I get into legislation, or if, in this case, if we're talking about the party platform, I like the ideas, but sometimes the words provide a bear trap that you would step into if you took it at face value. So I want to get it right the first time rather than come back and redo it and redo it and redo it. So that's the way that I also approach my legislation.
Gotcha. So let's talk about this. What are the things in District 13 that you feel compelled to address?
Well, I think one of the big things in District 13, and maybe I can set the stage, and then we can get into some of the issues. District 13 has grown probably as much or more than any other district in the state as I look at people coming in. So 2/3 of the people in District 13 are new to District 13 in the last 5 years. Now, about half of that 2/3 are from somewhere else in Idaho, mostly probably from Ada County. The other half are from out of state. So those people, those new people, 2/3 of District 13, have no knowledge of history, of place, or of people, nor should they, unless they've done some research, but they would not have been through the field, the growth, and so forth.
And I don't mean to interrupt, but even if you want to, like one of the really key reasons why I enjoy doing this podcast is because, one, I educate myself. I'm lucky enough to have people like you, and there's a gentleman by the name of Burke Mantell who's big into fish and game, and he was actually instrumental in bringing wild turkeys into Idaho. I guess when he moved here in '81 or something, there were only like a few dozen. And then there was a big push to, hey, if we can populate wild turkeys, right? If we can bring them in and let them procreate, we'll have this whole different hunting season in the spring, which will be awesome instead of just like waiting for the fall. So I have this guy in, and he's great. And he's been here for like 40 years doing this stuff. And if I wanted to find out that history in the absence of having that conversation, it would have been impossible, right? And I find a lot of those types of things happening as I have various guests on, which is, look, there's so many people moving here, and I find predominantly that people want to know about the area. They want to make this home. They want to invest deeply and meaningfully in it over multiple generations. Like, I hope my kids stay here, and I hope they have kids that of their own that then grow up here. But helping them find a resource so that they can actually learn about what has been going on. That's one of the biggest things. And there aren't really those resources. So I take this seriously.
Yeah. And what you're doing here is one of those resources. You know, I've been here essentially my entire life, and I didn't know about the gentleman you just talked about. But I think that's kind of the Idaho way. We see something that needs to be done or that we're passionate about, and we invest the time, the energy, and the resources and do it, and aren't looking for a whole bunch of accolades. It's nice to get a pat on the back here and there, but then we move on to the next project. And so a lot of that stuff goes unspoken and unsaid until you sit down and start asking people questions. Right. And that's part of what what my challenge is to come back into office is educating. And this is going to sound really odd, and it sounded odd. It sounds odd as I say it, but it certainly sounded odd when I first heard it. Is Jeff, you need to reintroduce yourself to your hometown. Because they don't know you. A third of the people know you. 2/3 don't know who you are, where you came from, and if all the information they have about you is something that somebody else has put in their mind that may not actually be true, that's all they have to go with.
Interesting that you're saying that, because the communication platforms that people are relying on most these days are short form videos. And I've been talking to a lot of legislators about this, because the problem is it's hard to make short form videos that are actually compelling, because when you make a short form video and you put it out, say onto Instagram or something, you're actually competing for somebody's attention. You're competing against the world of creativity and the world of entertainment, not the world of entertainment like the industry in Hollywood, but literally the world. Anyone with a cell phone could take a cell phone video of me wrestling a cobra in Africa, or like it's some kind of crazy street food in India, or, like I happen to have seen all of these videos, and it's like, I have a weird thing with watching street food in India get made. It's like repulsive and engaging at the same time, and I can't help it. Right. So it's very tough to have people trying to actually introduce themselves in a meaningful local manner when it's like, all of a sudden street food in India comes into my feed. I'm like, oh my God, look at that. So I appreciate you. We'll make some good clips. But anyway, so to that end, if you were reintroduced, say I was one of your potential constituents, what would you want to tell me?
I think what I'd want to tell you, and I've got to refine this to a bumper sticker, because we're talking about politics, which is very hard to do. And our attention span, if it gets beyond a bumper sticker, I recognize it goes to headlines, and that's about as far as it goes.
Right.
So telling people that I'm a 5th generation Nampan may or may not resonate. And some people actually may say, well, why does that make you any better than me? It doesn't. I just probably have a better knowledge of the history of Nampa and maybe have lived part of it to understand why it is what it is. So I think, I have to communicate that I have a base as to what Nampa has been, and maybe some of the things that have attracted the people that live in Nampa, why they came here. How did it get here? It just didn't happen. You just didn't fall on this utopia that now if we don't put sideboards around it, we're going to lose it. No, this has been something in the makings for 150 years. So I think it starts there. The second piece of it is resonate with what do I think is important. At the end of the day, freedom is the most important thing. Now, how do we define freedom? Well, we have to define freedom with regard to the environment we're working in, because we're all born with freedom, right? But it's the environment that we're born into that either provides that freedom or takes it away. If I'm born into a slave encampment in Africa, that's an environment that has immediately taken my freedom away. If I'm born in America, now I have the freedoms that at least the country and community provide, but freedoms go beyond what somebody's telling you what to do or not do. We have economic freedoms, financial freedoms. We all have mandates that we have to live by, whether they're government imposed or whether it's your spouse. Right. So rules that we work with. So what I want to do is I want to provide the best environment that people can exercise and I'll call it their Idaho independence. Their Idaho independence that attracts guys like the wild turkey introducer.
Burke Mantell, he's awesome.
And he saw an opportunity to bring in something that he thought would improve the life of Idahoans. And he saw a path to get there that wasn't bound by regulatory problems, wasn't bound by financial hurdles. Undoubtedly, he had hurdles to get over, but they were surmountable. And he saw that. And that's the environment that I want to preserve. That's the environment that I grew up in. That's the environment that my kids are growing up in, and hopefully generations to come. It's going to look different. It's not. I'm not talking about dialing it back to when I grew up. This is what we used to do. those days are gone. There was a lot of bad things then and a lot of good things, but we need to make it the best environment that we possibly can. So that starts with the economic, a strong economy, local economy, state economy, which means we have very few regulatory burdens. During my time in the State House, we reduced the regulations in Idaho by 75%. And that wasn't enough, in my opinion. So I introduced a bill and we passed the bill that allowed every agency director to waive a unnecessary rule on any particular, not a law, but a rule on any particular rule they had that was unnecessarily hindering somebody from doing something better. Probably an example of that, and this was really a problem brought to me by a constituent. They had a gravel pit operation, and they were expanding the gravel pit and needed a different access onto a different county road, which ended up being a state road too. And the access that was required by the rule of Idaho Transportation Department was actually an access built that would kill somebody. The traffic would kill somebody, undoubtedly. And everybody could see that, including the gravel pit owner, and that's the last thing they wanted to do. But they had to take that clear through the process and get it approved that way, and then appeal the approval to get it changed to something that would be safe, which is time, effort, money, resources. And I said, that's ridiculous. We all know it's wrong. Why can't we just do that here? Well, we don't have the authority to waive that. I said, well, let's work on getting you the authority to waive it going forward so we can do it right the first time.
Right. Common sense revisions on burdensome regulations. It's so remarkable that there could be something. That's actually something that I'm very struck with in the state of Idaho, that you genuinely have access to representatives. You have access to people that really are trying to do just common sense things that make your life in general better. And it's so shocking when you actually engage those people. Like, oh my gosh, like you're actually you're listening to what people are saying and you're trying to do something about it. And then also giving agency on a local level, right? That's one of the bigger things that, coming from a large state like California, you talk about born into freedoms, right? The freedoms I was born into are different than the freedoms that people are born into in Idaho, just because the state has a much stronger idea about the right way people should be living, which I don't care for. They also have a very clear idea about if someone's successful in the right ways or not, which is so odd to me. So like my grandparents came from Mexico. They moved to Arizona. My dad was born in Arizona, then was raised kind of in Southern California area, and atrocious, right? Like they had very, very little. My dad and uncles went to Vietnam and came back and thankfully survived, but went to school with the GI Bill, that became very successful doctors and attorneys. And then I was born. My family separated when I was pretty young. But the point is, I was a product of an immigrant, first generation Hispanic American. And then I went through all these public schools. And at some point along the way, whatever success you want to say I had, people were like, well, you didn't earn that, right? Because you look like a big white guy. Like, but I'm not, okay? And you're not really taking it. So again, California has a very distasteful view of success, in my opinion, whereas you come to Idaho, and I have not heard that sentiment expressed just in what you're saying right now, which is, look, we need the most opportunity for people to act freely in what they view as their best interest as possible. And if you do that, you're just setting the stage, almost like an incubator, for the best possible outcome for people. Instead of telling people or ascribing to people what the best path for them should be, just say, hey, look, you figure it out. We'll just try to stay out of your way.
Yeah, I think, I believe in Americans. I believe in Idahoans. And if you give them the space and opportunity, they're going to figure it out. And we talk about a lot of things that are a problem in the United States and in Idaho today. And you give us an opportunity, we will figure it out. It's okay to disagree and be disagreeable to a certain point, as long as you can keep it civil. Because I've not come across, including myself, anybody that has all the right ideas. I don't know that they exist. So it takes dialogue between opposing parties oftentimes. When I was I spent 6 years in the Senate, And while I was in the Senate, I
You want to pull this guy in front of you just a tiny bit. Yeah. Yeah. Just because it's hitting on your shirt.
Oh.
There you go. Yeah, you're good to go.
Okay.
Keep going.
While I served in the Senate 6 years, I introduced 106 bills on the Senate floor, more than any other senator during that period. I didn't do it with fanfare. In fact, I think if you were to poll people that watch the legislature fairly close, I probably wouldn't even been in the top 5 guesses if somebody were to ask them the trivia question: what senator introduced more bills between 2016 and 2022? What I'm most proud of, though, isn't so much the bills that I introduced, the number of bills, because that's neither here nor there. What I'm most proud of is that we passed 105 of those, 99%. And that was because politics, legislation is a team sport. So when I had a constituent come to me with an idea, and we refined it down to legislation to resolve their problem or provide opportunity, the first thing that I would do is I would go to the people that I would felt that would oppose it the most. Shoot holes in it. Let's make this the best piece of legislation that we can. That takes a lot of time and a lot of work. And I didn't do it all by myself, for sure. But I am proud to be part of that process.
What were some of the bills that you brought forward that had the most opposition that you were able to work around? Because the idea of bringing forward a concept and then actually dismantling it with somebody who doesn't want it and putting it back together in a way that's palatable to everyone, it seems like such a foreign concept all of a sudden. Like, people are like, that's compromise, or like, it's like, this is how things get done. Like, I don't think anybody should have the idea that their bills arrive to the floor like fully formed and beautiful with like zero blemishes. So what were some of the most conflict-oriented bills that you were able to still successfully get passed?
Probably, and let me say this, I stayed away from what I call the morality bills, because I don't believe that we can or should legislate morality. I think legislation should be done in a moral environment with a moral cause. But what's moral to me and moral to the next guy may be something different. And I don't think that laws should be telling them or me what to do.
If I may ask, can you give me an example of one of those bills?
This probably isn't a very good example, but it comes across, the top. And I think the library bill, maybe where it started, might have fallen into a little bit of a morality bill. I think as it's crafting, it's going through the process, I think it's becoming less and less of that. And when I say that, let me just boil it down to this bumper sticker. When it first came out, I believe that it was a bill that was really telling the parent, me as a parent, what my kids could read or not read. And I don't think that that's my moral compass. And as I raise my kids with morality, that should be the influences that they receive. Somebody else shouldn't be deciding that. Again, the bill has been massaged and made a much better bill than it started out. So that's probably not the best example, but that's the one that comes across.
I get where you're coming from. And again, there seems to be that they're ironing out the problems, right? It's like, okay, it was too punitive at one point with like a $2,500 or $10,000 fine. And then, how much local control do we want? How much state control do we want? Do we want to actually, put a fiscal burden on things? Like, there are all kinds of principal conflicts within these bills, and they span years, right? Like, this is not the first session a library bill has come up. There's one that got vetoed last year. And then as we were chatting about, there's one even before that. So there are all kinds of problems with this particular thing. If I may ask you, in talking about libraries and freedom, I was speaking with a gal just yesterday who's a huge homeschool advocate. And education seems to be one of those things where people, especially people moving from out of state, have such a poor taste in their mouth with public school systems that they almost immediately go towards homeschooling or they go to private school, even potentially without even trying the public school system. And I'm not saying they're right or wrong for doing this. I'm just observing that it's something that I see a lot of people doing. What do you think about that? How do we either refine the public school system in Idaho so that we can earn back the trust of people, even if we didn't offend them in the first place, because the people moving from out of state were bothered by other school systems. It's not Idaho's fault that California's a dumpster fire, right? So how do we refine the education system to the point where we can regain people's trust? Or are we already there and it's a matter of communicating what Idaho is and what Idaho is not?
That's a great question, and I think it's a little bit of both. First of all, you have people that are moving here for reasons, predetermined experiences somewhere else that we don't know about, nor did we cause, and they're in a different environment. Now, are they coming in with an open mind that public schools didn't work in California, but I really think that's the best environment for my kid to learn, so I'm going to try him in Idaho? Probably not, because they probably didn't want to move from California to begin with. So they're coming in with a predetermined set of where they're at and the assumptions that they make with regard to public school in general. They're going to know that it's different in Idaho than California, but maybe not enough to actually put the kids in them.
If I may interject, when I moved up here, we had already yanked our kids out of the public school in California. They were going to a private school system. And when we were looking to move up here, the number one thing we looked at was, we kind of looked at the public school, but we started asking around immediately about like what private options were available up here, exactly what we're talking about. And I can just speak from my experience. Mm-hmm. And pretty quickly I started hearing from people like, hey, the public school district here is actually really good, right? And like, that's not saying you have to go to it, but it's totally different. So just so you know, and there are these private schools and these are the options, but like, I had friends that had moved up here and they said, look, all 3 of my kids are going to this, or all 2 of my kids are going, and I'm actually pretty pleased with it. So again, I fall into that boat as well, which is, a predetermined idea of what schools were and were not.
And I think kind of getting back to your question, do we need to earn the respect, or is it already there and we just need to share it? I think it's both. And I think that's an ongoing process. That's not something that you just get and move on. I mean, kids only go to school for, from start to finish 12, 13 years, and then you got a whole, new classes and so forth. I'm a product of public schools, and I don't feel like I was shorted education anywhere along the way. I had good teachers and bad teachers. My kids are a product of both private and public schools. And I think if you talk to them, they would tell you that they weren't shorted along the way either. What we've really learned, and we probably knew this before, but it came to the forefront through the pandemic, is that all kids don't learn the same way. Some kids learn better online. Some kids learn better in a homeschool environment. Some kids learn better in a bigger environment. What I would say on average, and I can really probably speak for the Nampa public schools more so than anywhere else, is the Nampa public school system is a good school system. Now, if I'm going to turn my kids loose, put them at the bus stop, send them to school, pick them up at the bus stop at the end of the day, and think they're going to get the education, the best education that they can get, I'm wrong. I think it has to be navigated. And there's good teachers and bad teachers. There's teachers that speak the same language. I'm not talking foreign language, but I mean, my kids would resonate better with than others, just their teaching styles, what they are teaching, the different classes. What I've found over my years through observation is that the difference between a well-educated kid and a not so well-educated kid has very little to do with the environment that they're learning, whether it's public school, private school, homeschool, charter school. It has more to do, and I'm not saying that has no influence, because that's not true at all.
Sure.
But it has more to do with their support system. Who's around them? Is it family that's enforcing and helping with homework in the evenings, that's making sure assignments are on time, that's helping them navigate, through the public school system or the private school system? The difference in the private school and public school system that my wife and I saw was the private school offered a really good education. I think academically, I don't know that it was any better than the public school, but it was a smaller environment. So when we saw something going astray, we could jump in and get attention a little quicker than we could in the public school. So we started our kids actually in private school and then transitioned them in their middle school years into the public school.
Right.
And
When you have a little bit more of that foundation.
yes.
Right. Yeah. And I agree with you. There's actually Malcolm Gladwell, the author, wrote a pretty solid book. I think it was, I think this one was on Outliers. He's written several that I enjoy him as an author, and I understand there's large criticism of him because he largely aggregates research and then comes up with a comment based on that research. He's not actually doing the research, right? Like he's not going out to do all the psych studies, but doesn't matter. He actually identified that the biggest problems with inner city schools, people are always talking about improving the teachers and improving the environments, all of these things. But what he noted and really brought to light was if you actually look at the data about where someone starts and where someone ends, beginning and end of a school year, the inner school cities that were being largely criticized, like LA, for instance, the inner school cities, the teachers were actually moving the needle more for those students in that short time frame. The problem came over the summer and over the breaks when those students had less parental participation and academic enrichment, and they didn't even hold serve. They moved backwards. So then the next year they came in and the teacher had a heavier lift to even get them up to grade level. Whereas the other students that were successful were actually being deeply and meaningfully engaged at home and with extracurricular things of that nature. So it wasn't that all of a sudden we were like, okay, we need to take these kids that are in these quote unquote bad schools and put them in these better schools. It wouldn't have made a difference from this research. It was, hey, look, it's not how much they're learning over the course of the year. It's how much they're losing when they're on summer break. And it's how much their parents are trying to help them retain everything. That's what ultimately made the better education.
Yeah, that's an interesting comment, and I read that book as well. It's been a number of years ago now,
right.
So I don't remember all the bits and pieces of it. But I think in education, I mean, you look at the loss of kids through the summer, just the average kid,
Right.
And they start lower than where they left, and they have to make that back up. So does that give charge to more of a year-round school? And we do have year-round schools, and I've not looked at the data to compare the two between. I mean, certainly there wouldn't be the learning loss with the year-round school, but at the end of the day, are they getting to the destination, wherever that may be,
Right.
faster, better, with a more solid foundation? It might be interesting to know that.
Right.
I have a lot of hope for Idaho education today, more so than I have probably in the last certainly 6 years. Because we have somebody that I'm a big fan of, and that's in Debbie Critchfield, that is the superintendent of education. And I believe that she understands the environment. I believe that she understands the issues and the support that our local school systems need. Idaho has local control. I mean, our curriculum is all done by our local boards and reflecting the community. But they also need some oversight, I guess, if we're looking as a state, because that's where the primary funding source is coming from. And so we should have expectations for those taxpayer dollars. There should be some oversight, but that should be in a helpful manner instead of a hindrance, or should be the carrot and not the stick. The stick should be there, obviously, for those that choose to go a different direction. But in Idaho, we also have school choice for parents. We have private schools, we have charter schools, we have the public schools, public charter schools, and we have homeschools. In my lifetime, they have jailed people for not taking their kids to school. And the homeschool folks, advocates, have fought very hard to get legislation changed, the laws changed, so they could homeschool. And I'll call it the homeschool environment. The homeschool advocates recognize that their kids would learn better if they had a parent or a guardian or somebody, closer to their home and in their home that would teach them rather than sending them off to school. And they fought for years to get the laws changed to enable them to do that legally. And it's important, in my opinion, that we preserve that for them as long as they want it. I wish more people could homeschool, both had the ability to homeschool, including myself, and was invested in their kids enough and able to put food on their table. I mean, you're balancing a lot of things to be able to do that. So I admire the people that do and can do it and do it effectively. There's others, unfortunately, there's always bad apples that probably take advantage of that and maybe don't provide their children the education that they deserve. Yeah, but today in Idaho, there really isn't any oversight to ensure that that happens, and that's probably a decent balance with the freedoms that we like to enjoy.
The homeschool advocate that I was speaking with yesterday, to my surprise, was incredibly pro public education. She said that actually growing up, she had been homeschooled and then something happened in her family and they had to integrate into the public school system. And she was saying, look, when we needed to go into the public school system, I really wanted her family really wanted a good school experience, right? And the idea that she's like, look, if we all kind of take sides and we say, okay, look, that we got the public school kids who either can't afford private school or don't have parents that can afford to take time off to do homeschool, and they have to go to the public school. And then we take money away from them, or the public school system in general, to pay for private schools where people are already paying for those. She brought up a stat that I think something in other states that had attempted to do this, thinking that it would create more competition for students. She realized that it was predominantly like only 2 to 3% of students, after they passed essentially a voucher program, only 2 to 3% of the students that landed in the private schools had come originally from the public school. So the people that that program was aiming at helping, which is, hey, I can't afford to go to the private school, I'd like to, it didn't actually hit those people. It predominantly just reinforced the tuition and ingratiated the pockets of people already going to private school. Sure. So we have the public school, we have the private school, and then we have the homeschool. And all three of these people may need to rely on the public school at some point, right? I mean, the world is wrought with pitfalls of private education, not the least of which people have to afford private education. And in the event that somebody loses their job or you have some kind of family crisis and you have to start going to the public school, if we have pillaged the public school, this is what she was saying yesterday, if we've made the public school so weak and so feeble that if we have to rely on it for whatever reason, we're not going to be happy about it. And again, she pointed out, look, she homeschools her kids, but she wants to know that the neighbors who can't homeschool their kids, they get a good education. And she, again, had her own experience with, we were homeschooled and then we had to rely on the public school. So it seems that it's in everyone's best interest to have as strong a public school as possible, because even if we don't want to partake in it individually in this moment, we may need it later. That's our own self-interest, direct self-interest. And then tangentially, we don't want the people who cannot afford private school and cannot afford to homeschool, we don't want them missing out incredibly, right? Like we don't want them having this horrible education system that just makes them second-class citizens.
Yeah, I think that's, I think she is spot on. We have, 330,000 kids in Idaho schools. 300,000 of them plus are in public schools. The rest are in private and homeschool. We've got to have a good, strong base system. And what I would like to see is really more of an integration of homeschool and public school where it makes sense. When we're talking about activities, extracurricular activities, some of my mentors in school, we were talking earlier, growing up, were actually the coaches. They were teachers as well, but I didn't necessarily have them for classes. I was exposed to them through sports, through band, through extracurricular activities.
What'd you play?
What did I play? I played trumpet.
I played trumpet too.
Is that right?
Were you in jazz band?
No.
Oh, man.
No. I hung the trumpet up. Actually, maybe my parents hung it up my freshman year.
Yeah, right. It's not very, I find music to be one of those things. People question the value of the arts, right? And I'm not saying everybody does this, but there's a big question like, hey, we can't fund these other things. Why are we funding the arts? The trumpet, the music and sport, I think, offer people intangibles in life in that there's no faking it, right? Like if you're on a soccer team, fine, maybe you can hide on the field a little bit, but in a lot of sport like swimming, there's no faking it. You're either swimming this fast or you're not, and you will be laid bare to be like, that's it. Like you cannot hide. Same thing with music. And I also find that there are different levels of commitment that you have to different instruments. For instance, you and I could both sit down at a piano. I very much enjoy playing piano. I haven't played, for a long time, but we could sit down and we could hit a note. It's going to sound the same as a world famous pianist. Like you hit center C, like, okay, this is the note, right? No sweat. Even to make a noise out of a trumpet takes a substantial ask, right? And it hurts, right? Anybody who's ever tried to play trumpet and tried to play well knows the higher the notes you go, the more pressure builds up in your abdominal cavity, the more you're smashing the trumpet into your face because your facial muscles are not strong enough to make your embouchure capable of handling the pressure that come out of your abdomen. There are all these things that happen. You're in pain trying to play this instrument that sounds trash, and you know it. And if you can just keep doing it, I think young people develop a sense of reality that it's like they can't hide from this. You can't argue your way out of it. It's going to cost you something even to pick up that instrument. And if you become the type of person who's willing to pay that price and face reality, that makes you a better person. And I think that is a beautiful argument for the arts, which is, look, we all need to we need to become people that are willing to face a painful reality. How we come to do that, be it on a wrestling mat or in a band or, wherever, fine. But like, we got to get there somehow. And I think arts is a really cool way to get there.
Yeah, I do as well. Arts, sports, back to this kind of extracurricular things. Where I see the biggest rub in our community with regard to the homeschool and the public school is the public school charges the homeschoolers to participate because they are not receiving state money because they're not counted as a student. So I understand the argument that the public school says, well, we have to cover the cost of this. But then again, the private school is also, or the homeschooler right. is also paying taxes into the system that you can argue that they're not using. And,
right.
and we won't even get into that argument.
Right.
It's much bigger than that. But it'd be nice to see a better integration of those. And I think it would also help from the social aspect is see a bigger populace of people that probably are diverse from you, have different ideas, and make you a better thinker and a better compromiser and better communicator.
One thing that this gal, Andrea, that I was speaking with yesterday, homeschool advocate, was saying is that predominantly the homeschoolers that she speaks with just want to be left alone, in that they don't, even if somebody said, well, we could give you this money, she's like, listen, there's no such thing as a free lunch. Money always comes with strings attached. And homeschooling people want freedom. They don't. And even if you're saying, hey, we'll give you this funding or we'll give you this, she's like, listen, first off, the second you start offering out funding, you start screwing up the economics for other people, right? Like, say you want to give a homeschooler $1,000, a semester to pay for a gymnastics class. Like, well, what about the other parents that are paying for that gymnastics class out of their pocket and they go to the public school? They're not homeschooling. Well, now they might actually be priced out of the gymnastics, because if the gymnastics program knows that half of the kids coming just got an extra $1,000, they can actually increase their prices and gain more. And I'm not saying gymnastics people are evil, but my point is, although
supply and demand.
Yeah, right. Like they're real. You're banking, financial, like you understand what I'm saying. So I think what you're saying is, hey, there needs to be better integration. I think that's great. But I also think that within that integration, there needs to be some recognition that people that are homeschooling predominantly want freedom in their education. They don't want strings attached. So, perhaps a funding mechanism that they could opt in or opt out of if somebody said, hey, look, fine, but you still run into the problem with economics. I don't know. This is really complex, by the way.
Well, they do get complex, and again, we're back to freedom. And I would not want to put the homeschooler in any position that they felt like they were giving up freedom. And freedom, again, some of these are hard-fought freedoms. We talked about this conversation where we were putting people in jail for not sending their kids to school. And now they've got the freedom to educate their kids at home. I would like to see, if they want, more of an integration into those, without the economic barrier, into the public school activities, participation.
Similar to what people do with schools of choice. So in West Ada, if you say go to one of the schools of choice, which is, like Renaissance High School or Galileo or something like that, you're able to participate in the extracurricular engagements at your neighborhood school.
Sure.
Right.
And it's going to look different in every school district,
Right.
and every school, because there's diversities within school districts themselves. And I
Right.
think should really be left to the locals to figure out what that best is. And again, if the homeschool environment advocates aren't interested in that, then certainly it's not worth putting a lot of effort into figuring out how to make that one work.
Sure.
But it's again, it's important that we honor the freedoms. As we started talking about vouchers, school choice, different definitions in the legislature with regard to school, I should have seen this, but I didn't. That the homeschoolers were not interested in that for the very reasons you said. Every dollar, and particularly taxpayer dollar, is going to come with strings attached. And so we could pass a bill today that said there are no strings attached, but that is short-lived, because that won't last long. And the worst thing we can do is lead somebody into something that isn't going to be there in the longer term.
Right. You don't want something that's only good for the first 3 or 4 years. People design curriculums and micro schools and pods around that. And then all of a sudden in like year 5, it's all over.
Yep.
Right.
And that's the business side of it. What about the impacts that it's having on families and kids? Right. So we don't want to give people false direction. Right. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't change direction when we see it's going wrong, but we certainly don't want to set something up for some false direction.
Right. Aside from education, infrastructure and the economy, those seem to be two gigantic things, like just the roadways themselves. I went and saw Jordan Peterson actually came to, I believe, Nampa.
Idaho Center. Yeah.
Yeah, there we go. And did you go?
No, I read his book, but I didn't.
Yeah, he's great. What's really unfortunate about the evening is that Jordan Peterson is so prolific with content. He does his own shows. He's always going on other people's podcasts. So by the time I went and saw him, it's like, oh no, I've heard this bit. Like, cause he essentially has, messaging bits. Sure. And not to take anything away from the experience, but I'm like, no, I've heard the whale one with the dad. Okay, awesome. Like, fantastic. Yeah. Anyway, but just getting there, I went with a buddy of mine and we both live in the Eagle area, and there's such a train wreck. You have so many people going through these main arteries that were not built with the population in mind now. And then obviously the supporting economy, right? What do you think can be done to, one, improve the infrastructure that everybody uses on a daily basis, continue improving it, and continue supplying economic support, or at least opportunity for people, so we can continue growing?
Well, I think they're interrelated. I mean, I think we have to improve it to continue to provide the economic opportunity, and the economic opportunity fuels the infrastructure, the cost of the resources. We've gone a long ways in the last 5-6 years to improving the infrastructure in Idaho. And when we're talking infrastructure by the historic terms, we're talking roads, bridges, congestion, mitigation of congestion. Today, the congestion we see in the most populous part of the state, southwestern part of the state, has to do with people moving in. So how would we have seen this coming? Do you build roads to nowhere, bridges to nowhere? Right. It wouldn't be a good use of our money.
That was a Sarah Palin poll, bridge to nowhere. My dad lived in Anchorage for 25. He just moved here like 6 months ago, but okay. he could see the bridge to nowhere.
To nowhere.
Yeah, that's pretty great.
So you can plan on that, and I think the best planning for those type of things out in the future, and a lot of people were talking, 25, 30, 40, 50, 60, 100 years out in the future, is really preserving corridors. Not necessarily building them, but then you have the corridors preserved, because acquisition of property is probably as expensive and time-consuming as actually building the roads themselves. We're seeing this on Highway 16 right now, the expansion out to I-84. And I won't get off too far on a tangent here, but we didn't go down the corridor of an existing road because there was too many houses built that took access to that road. It would have been more costly to widen those roads than it is to go through a center section of farm ground that there aren't houses that you have to take out, or high value pieces of real estate and improvements. But So with regard to infrastructure, we've gone a long ways towards also curing our backlog. We had over $1 billion in deferred maintenance in our roads throughout the state of Idaho, and we funded those things. And so you're seeing construction today that we've never seen, both fueled by our growth and by the funding mechanisms as we keep a balanced budget in Idaho. So we're leveraging the federal dollars. There's more federal dollars, and this is true of most states, certainly of Idaho. There's more federal dollars that build roads in Idaho than there is any other source of funding. A lot of people don't know that, and they talk about not accepting federal dollars, but in fact, if we weren't to accept federal dollars, then we're going to have to figure out another way to fund our roads. So from my standpoint, the federal dollars are really important to continue to build and improve our roads. But I would add one more thing with regard to infrastructure that some people talk about, but not everybody, and that is broadband. Many parts of Idaho do not have access. Rural communities do not have access to a reliable, fast internet. And that is the highway to commerce for many of them. You see a lot of these rural communities that are fading away and dying. The kids are growing up and they're looking for something other than what that community can and does provide. And I think if we can get more broadband introduced into rural Idaho, we're actually going to grow rural Idaho, because they're great places to live, but you have to be able to make a reasonable wage and income. And I believe providing infrastructure with regard to not just the roads into those communities, but the internet into those communities, so they can get into the commerce that they really deserve.
Right. Yeah. And I actually spoke with a professor at Boise State recently, Dr. Talley, and he grew up in lifer in Idaho and really has looked at the brain drain that people experience, because you have smaller rural communities and you have individuals that grow up there, they exhaust the education and economic capacity of the area, or they just move out the second they can and go some place college, but they don't return back to those communities. And as such, the community is left with kind of a shell of what it was, because you took the talent and the capacity out of that community and those people don't return. But finding ways to make a viable economic option, for instance, broadband, right? We're talking really robust internet access. There are all kinds of people that I know in this community that do work almost exclusively online, but it's because they have access to the internet and they can work from wherever that they're able to do that. Having that pipeline of life and economic potential, at the very least, going throughout the area is such a huge thing. Yeah.
And again, that's a lifeblood to our economy.
Right.
We talk infrastructure, and to me, that has to include the conversation with regard to broadband.
Right. What do you think about so if the broadband and those are part of the economy, do you think there are any other policy or regulation things that can be instituted or taken away that would spur more economic growth, aside from the infrastructure that would need to be supporting it? What else do you think could happen? Because that's at the heart of all of this, which is like, how much revenue is Idaho or these small communities producing that we can then live off of?
That's a really good question, and I will probably go a whole different direction than you're expecting here. And that is, we have to continue to support our communities. And one of the areas that we're not supporting specifically out of the legislature is our healthcare community. And if we don't have healthcare, it's not going to take long for people to figure that out, and they're going to move to some place that they can get healthcare. And so we're going to lose a lot of the people that will leave. Some of and I am certainly pro-life. And have voted that way as well. My record would show that. But we have to be real careful about pro-life is both the fetus and the mother. We have to be real careful that we're not putting doctors in positions that they potentially are breaking the law, or they don't know if they're breaking the law, because there's plenty of other places for them to go. So I think when we talk about how do we keep our economy robust, which it is now. How do we make it even better? I think we have to look at public safety. I think we have to look at, and I would expand public safety to also include healthcare. So when you have a medical emergency at your house, you're picking up the phone and you want somebody there as quick as they can. Now, where do they go from here? So they're at your doorstep. And if you have a heart attack and we've lost a cardiologist in the community, they have to go 10 miles further to get the care. That may be, 10 critical minutes that could cost a person,
Right.
Their life. Same thing applies, with women's health. So we have to be real careful as we go forward and pound our fist on the table saying that this is what we want. Do we really want the consequences of some of the things that we're asking for? So we need to be thoughtful. From an economic standpoint, during my tenure, Idaho, and not because of me, but I certainly supported it, Idaho became the highest credit rated state in the nation.
Mm.
We shared that with other states. We weren't the only one. And today we have a higher credit rating than the federal government does, which doesn't make any sense to me. We don't have a printing press. They do. And that's not necessarily a good thing because it has been abused by the federal government. But the reason that the federal government's credit rating was degraded, was knocked down a notch, isn't because we missed any interest payments or were in danger of default. It was because the rating agencies looked at the ineffectiveness and the chaos in Congress and what we're doing there. As I look at Idaho, we're starting to resemble some of that.
How do you mean? Because I actually remember when they got downgraded. I remember I was reading in the paper, well, again, paper on my phone, an article on my phone.
Sure.
But I remember talking specifically about this, which is, hey, look, we haven't done, yes, we have greater debt, but the ratio of debt to income seems sufficient. What is it? And it came down to there's too much chaos. They don't trust what's going to happen in a year or two.
Yeah. There's too much unpredictability.
Right. So how do you see that playing out in Idaho as well?
Well, it's a little different in Idaho because the federal government has their issues. Sure. Idaho has our issues. But some of the infighting, and it really gets back to the infighting within the Republican Party. And again, I'm a strong, solid Republican. And I don't understand why we want to eat each other at times. But I'll take the JFAC process, for example. That's got a lot of new media this year. So the JFAC process is the budget setting process for the state of Idaho, and it has been this way, I believe, since the 70s, the process. And the process is key, particularly when you're looking at rating agencies and over time, they want to understand that there's stability, and when there isn't, how that is going to be rectified. So the co-chairman of JFAC decided to change the process this year to make it more transparent and fiscally accountable. And I think I think they truly believe that they were doing that, and that was their goal. And I believe that that goal has merit and should be striven for. So what they did is they divided every budget, 110 budgets, up into two pieces. One they call the maintenance budget, and that's essentially, as they've defined it, and you get into it and there's some nuances, but as they've defined it, it's everything that we funded last year for that agency to operate. And then new monies or line items are going to be handled separately. As a banker, as a business owner, as a member of JFAC and co-chair of JFAC, I've probably looked at thousands of budgets and crafted thousands of budgets over the years and approved and declined, thousands of budgets. I've never seen a perfect budget. But this is a process, just from a fundamental standpoint, makes no sense at all. Why would you divide a business, an agency, in half and approve them separately? Because they're integrated with each other. So the purpose behind that is the argument that was made is we never look at those base budgets, those maintenance budgets, which isn't true. We don't look at them as deep as I'd like to look at them, but we do look at them. So let's just go ahead and approve those, which amount to about just short of 90% of all the money that Idaho spends. So let's just approve those without any discussion or anything, any debate, any whatever. And we'll focus our efforts on this 10%. Well, to me, coined this phrase not by me, but by somebody a long time ago, it sounds to me like we're stepping over dollars to pick up dimes just with that. Why are we blindly approving 90% and focusing on 10%? So I think we've got it backwards. If we're going to focus on something, let's focus on the 90% and just be blind to the 10%. But I'd rather focus on the entire pot. And I think there's ways to do that. And maybe through this process, as it evolves, we might get there. I'm hopeful that that will happen. But
I mean, like the 10% that they're focusing on, those are the hot buttons, right?
Well,
like that's predominantly what actually happens, that attention gets brought, let's say in the most charitable interpretation of the situation, attention gets brought by constituents to a certain issue, and those constituents push on their legislator to pay attention to that issue. And even though they're only focusing on a very small portion, like maybe an exception to the rule or something of this nature, that's what actually drives all of his attention towards these tiny, I don't want to minimize it, but lesser robust issues, which is like, okay, now we spent 2 weeks talking about this little thing that's really doesn't account for as much as other people might think.
Sure. No, I think there's some truth to that. It's really typically new programs that are in that 10% or expansion of existing programs, maybe. And so it will get the attention because that's a natural decision point. Should we or shouldn't we?
Sure.
I think that we should have natural decision points in what we've already done too. Did it work? Did it not work?
Right. Let's assess what we're already spending money on, not just keep spending the money because that's what we did last year and the year before.
Exactly. And that's the point that I'm getting at. And maybe these new programs are worth spending money on, but let's see if we can find money in the old programs that aren't needed any longer.
What do you mean? What is an example of one of those programs?
Well, if I knew what they were, we would probably be rid of them already. And that's where the work comes in. And people talk about a zero-based budget, which means you start from zero every year and you justify every dollar that you're going to spend. That's the most comprehensive budget process there is. In the state of Idaho, that would be nearly impossible to do just because of the size of the state budget at $14 billion and
Sure.
Just the number of complexities and programs and so forth. But there is a way I think you can go to zero-based budgeting on a rotating basis. Maybe you only look at every budget at a zero base every 5 years. We'd have to work out the logistics. There'd be more research that need to be done because we don't want to focus all of our efforts just on the process. There has to be substance and results from that process. But I think one of the drivers of this also this year is political. Why did we change what we're doing? What makes a good bumper sticker? More transparency, more accountability. There's no more transparency in this program than there ever's been. The information that's out there is the same information. It might have a little different light cast on it. So I don't suggest that there's more or less transparency. I guess maybe to a certain degree there is less because we're blindly putting aside 90% of the budget. But I think it's really driven by, well, let me step back. In my opinion, JFAC should be funding all of the other committees' will and laws that they pass. JFAC should not be driving policy. It's not a policy committee. It's funding all the laws and mandates and so forth that we're placing on state government. And that's really where our focus should be. So what happens is there's a particular program that maybe a legislature doesn't like. And let's say it's in education.
Sure.
Pick one. And they can't get enough support to actually change the law to say we're not going to do that anymore. So what do? They come in and say, well, we're going to defund it then. I don't think that's good policy. I think if in fact we shouldn't be doing something, there should be enough support in it to make it the law that honestly, then the JFAC doesn't have an opportunity to fund. I think that's we've got it backwards. When we don't like something, we just take the money away instead of going through the process that we're set up. If that were the case, there's only one committee that you need, right? JFAC. We'll just fund all the things we like and not fund the things we don't like and go home. Well, that's not the way it is supposed to work, and that's not the way that it should work. So,
correct me if I'm wrong, but we saw that on a national level as well. I believe it was the Affordable Care Act. There was conversation in like 2011 or 12 where they couldn't get the law repealed in its entirety, so they just stripped it of all its funding, or at least were attempting to. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, the Affordable Care Act was probably certainly one more recent on a federal basis.
Yeah, right.
And then how Idaho reacted to that, if you remember, the federal government said, okay, this is the law of the land, and you as a state, with your Medicaid program, which you have to provide Medicaid, you will either go to a state exchange or you'll go to a federal exchange. Your choice. That's the only two choices you have. Many states, including Idaho, said we're just opting out. Well, that wasn't an option because the opt-out by law was then a federal exchange. Fortunately, after some hard-fought battles long before I was in the legislature, we did go to a state-based exchange, and I had the privilege of actually being on that founding board to establish that exchange and was treasurer of that. And I didn't know what I was getting myself into when the governor asked me to sit on it, but I really enjoyed that. And as I look back in my career, that was one of the more successful eclectic group of people that came together to agree on something that actually that finally did work. Whether we like the policy or not, that wasn't the question. The question is, how are we fiscally going to take care of Idahoans and responsibly spend Idaho tax dollars and keep as many of those tax dollars in the Idahoans' pockets as possible? And I believe we did that.
Yeah. Jeff, we've talked about a ton of things today. I know, time is an issue here. Coming to a close here, we've talked about education, we've talked about infrastructure, we've talked about healthcare. What have we missed?
Well, we've covered a lot of ground. There are many, and we could just go through the committees in the legislature to talk about the things we missed legislatively. But those are really the important things to me: the education, the economy, the infrastructure, and certainly public safety, broadly defined, not only the police, but also the fire and first responders, and even our veterans. We need to take care of the veterans, both the National Guard members, as well as those that have served, and we have made promises to them, and we need to fulfill those promises with regard to the state.
It's beautiful. Well, thank you for coming on today. Thank you for explaining this. I obviously will offer the same interview to Senator Lenney. If he wants to take me up or not, no problem. But I do appreciate you coming out and talking about the priorities you have, what you think is really best to move forward with Idaho. I mean, obviously, this is a state drawing from all across the country. It's the fastest growing per capita in all 50 states, which is beautiful. But as you're pointing out, that leads to a lot of questions about, look, do you understand the trajectory the state's on? Do you understand for the people moving here? And it was something of an incredible education for me. I'm very fortunate to be able to talk to people like you and others that help me understand where I fit, right? Like where my story and the story of Idaho kind of intertwine. So
Sure.
Thank you for coming in and offering that for me, and good luck with your campaign.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate your time.
This podcast is brought to you by MTU Studios. If you're looking to start a podcast or need content for your business or personal use, content of any type, please reach out to MTU Studios. MTUstudios.com. We'd love to help.